I'm Aiden Iacchini. I'm a professor in the College of Social Work at the University of South Carolina. I'm also the Associate Dean for Research and Faculty, and I'm so grateful that you all are here today for a training focused on emotion recognition and management to maintain a positive outlook. We're really excited. This is really a partnership project between the College of Nursing, Pharmacy, Social Work, AHEC, and then, of course, funded by HRSA. The first objective we're going to cover is talking a little bit about emotions, right, and how they impact us, and then also thinking about the link then between emotions and wellness. We're going to then apply some of the things we're talking about to a case scenario, which really is ourselves. And then the last thing we're going to do is talk about some strategies for regulating emotions and kind of end, I think, on a relaxing note, which hopefully will take you towards the end of your lunch break in a positive way. And, there's a chat box here. I just want to say Ayla will kind of be monitoring that. If I'm saying something that doesn't make sense or you want to add your expertise to the conversation, I would love that too. So I will try to monitor as much as I can, but Ayla will be doing that for us as well. So let's get into our first objective. So thinking about emotions and how they impact us as humans. So I'm sure it's no shock to this group, a large group of, I think, mostly helping professionals, right? That we've got a lot of emotions as individuals, and we experience a lot of different emotions throughout the day. But one of the things that's important to think about is some of the emotions that we experience, right, are innate. We're born with them. Other things are learned, right? And that really does also depend on the theoretical lens of which you come from, both as an individual and even as a practitioner. But emotions can range anywhere from 6 seconds to as long as a minute. And that really has to do oftentimes with the magnitude of the emotion that we're experiencing. So emotions are very dynamic. They're adaptive, right? They're adaptive responses to the environment. And so emotions are very complex, and they orchestrate our behavior in specific ways, right? And so when we experience an emotion, oftentimes that leads to a subsequent behavior. And that's something that we need to think about, how our emotions drive our behavioral responses. So there's a lot of different ways at looking at emotions. We can't obviously cover them all in an hour and a half training. But one of the things that Melissa, who, like I said, was the visionary for this grant, and she had a strong background in dialectical behavioral therapy, comes at it from a very biosocial model, right, of understanding emotion. So we're really going to focus in this training on the last two, which is kind of the psychophysiological and the neurological components, right, of emotions. And so let's think about that as we kind of move forward in talking about emotions. Robert Plutchik, who's a seminal researcher in the area of emotion, created this wheel, and I think it's helpful in lots of different ways. One of which he identifies 8 primary emotions, right? And those are the ones in the ring just outside of the center ring. So where you see joy, trust, fear, surprise, sadness, disgust, anger, anticipation, those are kind of the 8 primary emotions that we as individuals experience. But what's cool about this wheel, and I think very helpful, is also thinking about there's different levels of intensity, right, in people's emotional experience. So how you go from the center of the continuum to the end of the continuum across those different types of emotions. So for example, admiration, trust, acceptance. So this also shows you, like I said, the continuum of emotions you may experience. But what's interesting, I think, to think about, is also how we name our emotions. How many of us feel something and can easily name what it is? For some of us, it's fairly easy. For some of us, right, it's a little bit harder. And I will self-disclose, I have a 4-year-old, so we do a lot of talking about how to name our emotions. So I think I'm getting more practice now than I ever have in the past, which makes me more aware of what I'm feeling to be able to help her understand what she might be feeling. But, one of the things that's really critical to think about is how readily you're able to identify what emotion you're having. And that's important because that's closely connected to how we might manage and regulate ourselves as we experience these emotions. So if we can't name what they are, it's then really hard, right, to kind of manage our feelings around that and regulate ourselves in response to it. So, one of the things to think about is that, from the neurological perspective, right, neural firing in the brain happens really quickly, which is why emotions last about 6 seconds, maybe even up to a minute. But it's also why you can feel like you are on a roller coaster, right? And we experience a lot of different types of emotions during the course of our day. So I'm sure that's not a surprise to most, right? So there are other researchers out there too. And I just want to point out that, how we describe emotions, what we might be able to name, that how we name them is really up to you, right? As the individual, it's our interpretation of our experience. People might be able to help us name our emotions, as I said in the example of my daughter who's learning about her emotional experiences at the age of 4. But really thinking about it's subjective, right? We feel happy. Different things make different people feel happy, right? Different things make different people feel sad. So it's a subjective experience. We also can look at emotions from more of a behavioral goal standpoint. So, when we see people, and I really think about this in the context of children, which is my own area of research, but thinking about, the behavioral functionality, right? The functionality of certain behaviors. So hitting, biting, running, right? You may have an idea of what someone's experiencing based on the behavior they're demonstrating for you. Even if they might not be able to name the emotional experience, you observe the behavior. And it could be an indication, right, of what you might be experiencing based on your behavior. So that's really kind of that biosocial lens, thinking about there is sort of an action urge attached to most emotions driving, right, behavioral responses. It's also important to say that that emotions are important, that we really do have to embrace them, and we have them for a reason. They're not bad, they're here to help us, and that's why they're functional. Like, they help us get out of the way of being hit by a car. They save us from going down a dark alley. Our emotions trigger responses such as the fight or flight response, right? So our emotions allow us also to experience the positive things in life, the things that bring us joy and satisfaction. But they may also be an indication for us that something may not be right, right? We might be experiencing something in our lives that we want to see changed. And, I was thinking about this in the context of our grant, which is really focused on workforce wellness and resilience. I wanted to pose the question to you if folks would be willing to put in the chat, but, what are some emotions that you might experience if you're feeling burned out from your job?
Fatigue.
Fatigue, feeling tired. Yes, that's a good one.
Resented, frustrated, anxiety, resentment, disappointment, exhaustion, impatience, shame. These are all very valid emotions.
Boredom.
Yes. How many people feel like they're so bored, right? Of what they're doing. They want to change, need something different. Yes. So it's important to think about that, even, in the context of our professional lives, our personal lives, right? That emotions are very important. They're there for a reason. And that we need to think about how they influence our behavior on a subconscious level. So the benefits to them, right, are that they motivate us. They also can help focus us, right? We can become numb to our emotional experiences, and that can end up leading to some other maybe more challenging experiences that we might have as individuals in terms of managing or dealing with that. But being connected with our emotions can help us recognize how our body's feeling. It can help us predict how we might react, right, to certain situations, either at work or at home or in our communities, and also help us figure out how we want to handle situations that arise. So they are a part of us, and each emotion does have a purpose. They also, this one we could talk, I think, all day about. I always find it challenging doing shorter presentations because there's so much time we could spend on all of these concepts. But Emotions, another benefit of emotions is they help us communicate, right? And they help us communicate different things. So when we experience an emotion, we release different chemicals in our body and it helps us react, right? And this can be shown in our facial expressions. How many of you have been at a meeting and then you realize, oh no, my face looks a certain kind of way that maybe I hadn't hoped to have? I see some hands raised, right? So, our facial expressions map on our emotions a lot of times, right? They really often can communicate faster than we can even use language to describe how we're feeling. And oftentimes, right, our body language can also back up our emotion and our voice tone, right? How we talk. I think about this, a lot, even in the context of being a parent, right? Thinking about how voice tone can communicate so much, right? And so, a lot of times it's really important to think about that, not only our facial expressions, our body language and voice tone, how that all connects back to what we might be experiencing. And a lot of times we've learned to manage those things, right? And we've become, I would say, most often pretty good at hiding them. But we have to remember that one of the main purposes and benefits of emotions is it does allow us to communicate quickly, right? How we're feeling in a situation. And you can't always, this is the hard part, right? We can't always anticipate what's going to happen, right? We just don't know what's going to happen in a situation, in a work meeting, in an encounter with a client. So it's important to remember that. It's also important to remember another benefit of our emotions is that they help us communicate, right, to others. How can someone give an example either in the chat or unmuting themselves? How do our emotions either communicate to others or influence the emotions of others? Can someone give an example? If you smile at someone, they may feel happy and smile back. Yes.
Even in a friendly conversation, you might communicate that something has bothered you or hurt you.
If you're enthusiastic, that might spur others to be enthusiastic as well.
Yes, that I was just going to say that, and when I teach classes on days where I feel a little like low energy, the whole class can be low energy with me, right? As the instructor of the class, when I come in and I'm high energy, I feel like that really influences. So yes, that's a great point.
Our facial expressions and body language can also express calmness, especially when other people are ramped up or there is a crisis going on.
Yeah.
Having that sense of calm can also be very powerful.
Yes. We can help calm other people. Yes. I see a couple things in this chat, the startled effect, I jump, you jump, energy transfers. Yeah. So it is important to acknowledge just how powerful, right, emotions are, not only for ourselves, but then also how we express our emotions influences those that we are around. But one of the things that, I wonder how many of you experience this, right? But when we're trained, right, as social workers, as clinicians, as helping professionals, how often are we taught to kind of mask our emotional experience? And so it's really important to think about, how much as clinicians we probably mask what we're feeling, right? And then how does that impact us, right? And how we communicate with others when we become better at masking our emotions. So when our facial expressions don't really become parallel, right, with how we're actually experiencing the situation or feeling on the inside. So that can be very challenging. And I think that's something that's important to think about, especially with you all, being helping professionals. Yes, it can also add to our burnout, right? Just exhausted, right? From masking emotions all day, just having to feel the feeling like you have to be on and manage your response, right, to others. It can lead to being tired, exhausted, and burnout professionally for sure. Okay, so what I want to do next, this is one of the videos that we created within our project. It's a great video. It's grounded in dialectical behavioral therapy, but it's a great model for us to think about. As you're watching it, I want you to be thinking about maybe an experience you've had that kind of resonates with the scenario being presented. and then we'll kind of talk about it. So it's a short video, but we'll have a little discussion after it's over.
It's a beautiful Thursday morning at Metro Central Hospital. Beatrice is a social worker at the hospital. It's her first job. She's been in this job for 8 months and she loves it. It's a perfect fit for B, who was voted most likely to save the world in high school. She's always been a sensitive, caring helper. Beatrice is getting ready to see a new patient, Anthony Frederick. She's determined to help Anthony get the services he needs when he leaves the hospital, services that will keep him home. As Beatrice introduces herself to Anthony, she's struck by how much Anthony reminds her of her brother Martin. Anthony's personality is lively and cheerful like her brother's, and they're both musicians. And her brother was about the same age as Anthony when he died last year from COVID. Anthony also has COVID with additional complications from HIV. Beatrice is concerned at how weak he seems. Ill as he may be, Anthony is in good spirits. He makes a joke about his new froggy singing voice. But their enjoyment quickly turns to alarm as Anthony begins a wrenching coughing fit. Beatrice is struck with fear. This is the kind of coughing fit her brother Martin had during his illness. She asks Anthony, "Can you breathe? Can I help?" Fueled by fear and not thinking clearly, Beatrice heads to the nurse's station for help. She barks at the nursing staff that Anthony needs help now. As Beatrice begins to feel anger, will the nurse do enough? This is too much like my brother. Will he die like my brother? Beatrice's family always said she and Martin would be there for each other as they grew old together. She feels cheated by his death. How can we and Beatrice understand how she's gone from a happy beginning of the day to being in a stew of anger? The dialectical behavior therapy model describing emotion can help. The beginning of this model is our vulnerability and a prompting event. Emotions are activated by prompting events, but before we can even experience the event, we have pre-existing vulnerabilities. Beatrice's vulnerabilities include her sensitivity and empathy. Because of her sensitivity, she has strong responses to emotions. And as motivated as Beatrice is, she's also felt overwhelmed by the number of people she's had on her caseload and the depth of their problems. A final vulnerability is her unresolved sadness and grief at her brother's death. That final vulnerability has a powerful impact on Beatrice's interpretation of the prompting event. Beatrice's last experience with someone like Anthony was her brother's death. Prompting events can be external, like meeting someone, and they can be internal. For example, your existing emotion prompts a second emotion. You could consider that the first prompting event is when Beatrice meets Anthony. Beatrice is sad when she meets someone like her brother, especially someone who is ill as her brother had been. Because Beatrice is motivated to help Anthony, she focuses her attention on him, and she's not aware of her sadness. But Anthony's wrenching cough is a prompting event that activates fear in Beatrice. Often what really sets off our emotions is our interpretation of the prompting event and not the event itself. Beatrice interprets Anthony's situation in terms of her brother's experience. Prompting events activate biological changes in our brains, nervous system, and body sensations. Neural firing changes our brain. Brain circuits are activated and brain chemicals are released. Our nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, send signals to the muscles to contract. And the sympathetic nervous system increases heart rate and blood pressure. Beatrice's rate of breathing also increases. Beatrice can feel these sensations in her body. In addition to biological changes, the model shows corresponding expressions. When emotions are activated, facial muscles change. Beatrice's eyes have opened wider and she frowns, gritting her teeth. She raises her voice when she asks Anthony if he can breathe and if she can help. Beatrice's emotion urges her to action as she moves quickly to the nurse's station for help. The biological and expressive responses to emotions loop back to after effects. After effects impact our ability to think, our physical functioning, our memory, and more. Dialectical behavior therapy uses a phrase with after effects. Emotions love themselves. This means that an emotion's after effect can be that we have increased sensitivity to that same emotion. We can become hypervigilant to events and pay stronger attention to things that will help refire our emotion. Beatrice's memory of her brother made her vulnerable to reinforcing past emotions. Beatrice's attention narrowed so that the most likely outcome she could see and feel for Anthony was his death. She couldn't think clearly enough to remember her reason for being there, which was that Anthony was well enough to be released from the hospital. Related to after effects is the activation of secondary emotions. Our responses to our primary emotion can become secondary emotions. This secondary response can happen so quickly that we may not even identify the first emotion. And these secondary emotions can become a second prompting event. Beatrice's anger is a secondary emotion and becomes a secondary prompting event. Prompting events can be internal. Her interpretation of Anthony's cough is, he's going to die like my brother. Her biological distress increases with her anger. This model intentionally uses the term prompting event rather than trigger. Prompt allows for the possibility that a response is not inevitable, and it leaves room for change. Where can change happen in this model? The model includes space to name the emotion and have awareness about it. In fact, research indicates that people who can give an emotion a name experience less negative emotion. What if Beatrice can catch herself and name her emotions? Once Beatrice can begin to name her emotions, anger, fear, and sadness, she opens the opportunity for awareness. Beatrice's awareness allows her to interrupt her refiring and look at the facts that brought her to the situation in the first place. Awareness supports Beatrice to think more clearly. She changes her interpretation by observing facts. She's here to help Anthony return home. He is ill, but the health professionals who surround him have determined he's well enough to return home. The model for describing emotions is a way to look at how emotions are activated. This model also gives us direction for managing our vulnerabilities, our attention, and our awareness so that our responses can be positive, productive, and helpful to us.
Okay, what are some thoughts that you all have about that short video? What stands out for you there, or something that maybe you thought about differently?
The concept of the prompt as opposed to talking about triggers, that whole idea of not an inevitable response coming. I like that.
Or maybe this is something you all are very familiar with. You could say that too.
One thing
I could relate a lot to Beatrice. Being in a similar situation, and it being something that you've dealt with before, or something very close to your heart, like her brother's death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, how many of us have had experiences in our workplace of, you encounter someone, you maybe have a less desirable experience, right? And then you encounter somebody else and they do something very similar and you think, oh no, not again, right? And that's very common. But it also, like you're saying, relates to things we've experienced in our own personal lives, our own vulnerability factors, right, that we bring to the experience too. I think someone else was going to unmute.
I was saying that I am familiar with this model, which is very cool. It's nice to see it. I love that it includes the possibility of a second prompting event, like an emotion becoming a prompt for another emotion, and that sort of chain reaction that can happen.
Yes. And I'm looking in the chat, emotions love themselves. Yes. Emotions motivate actions. Some of you were really seeing yourself in the experience of the clinician in the video. Yeah, and then we'll talk about that, right? But the idea of naming our emotion, it sounds simple, but it's very complicated and yet also important, right? For naming what it is we're experiencing, to have more power and control over it, being able to regulate and manage that experience. Yes, and reminding me how our view of the situation become very narrow when activated. Yes, so when we feel activated, right, we can narrow what we're seeing to only the things that are really prompting us, right, and prompting that emotional experience. Those are great points. I mean, I love these. Name it to tame it. That's great. Yes. Okay, so let's think about this a little more, because I think, the nice thing about that model is it also suggests that we have an opportunity to change that experience, right? That it's not a fixed experience, but something that we do have power over and we can change if we wish. And so there's lots of different ways, right, where we can change an emotional experience. So we'll just talk about a few here. But first, one of the things that we can do is attend and think about our vulnerability factors and consider what they might be for us, right? And these vulnerability factors are going to be different in different situations you encounter, right? Those in your personal life, maybe versus those in your professional life. But it's important to think about kind of what those are. The second thing we can do is also just check ourselves, right? In terms of how we're interpreting the event. Are there alternative interpretations of what we experience? And acknowledge that maybe that's what's triggering the response, which could potentially change our experience the next time, right? So part of it is thinking about how we're interpreting an event. Are there alternative explanations for that interpretation? And might our opportunity to think about the variety of interpretations of an experience help us, right, change that experience and be more open maybe the next time. The other thing to think about, and I like this little table here, is that, our emotions tend to have very typical responses, but by naming it, right, recognizing what the emotion is and acting opposite of that, it may allow us, not always, right, but it might allow us to have sort of a different, more positive kind of experience. So, when you think about the emotions here in this table, for example, sadness, right? Oftentimes when we're sad, many of us just want to be by ourselves, right? We want to be, go in our room, close the door, be by ourselves. But if we do the opposite action of that, might we feel better, right? If we're with others in social, close social relationships, increasing our activity levels, doing the opposite of what we feel like doing, is there the possibility, right, that we may feel a little bit better and less sad? The same thing with fear, right? Thinking about avoidance. I think about my, own personal life. I had an experience when I was a high school student and I was in a hospital doing a rotation, like, I don't know what it was, but, as a high school student, you could go and sort of shadow a nurse. And I hadn't been feeling good, but my parents were out of town and my grandmother made me go, even though I said I didn't feel good. So I got to the hospital and I was in the emergency room watching a nurse work with a patient, and I passed out. And I passed out, and they said that they weren't sure if I had a seizure, so they admitted me to the ER, right? And so, as you can probably guess, every time I ever get near a hospital, heart rate goes up, stress level goes up, right? Because I can still, decades later, think about that experience that I've had. Now, more positive experiences across my life have changed that, but I could still get back to that place if I wanted to, if I didn't think hard about why I'm having that experience, right? And so, that relates to vulnerability factors, how we think about what we've experienced. And then, for me, the fear of that really made me want to avoid the medical system for a long time because I didn't want to feel that way, right? And so, you think about that, but that's, for me, that's not a choice. We got to go get medical care. So, thinking about how do I go, but think about it prior. And so anyway, that's a self-disclosure story, but I think it can highlight, right, how things in our past can shape us, shape current experiences that we have, and how sometimes we have to act opposite of feeling what we want to do in order to achieve what we want. Okay, and then the last way that we're going to talk about here, at least, that we can think about changing an emotional experience, right, is attending to some of those after effects, which, can kind of keep that emotional experience refiring and become a second prompting event. It can kind of help us move forward. So, after something like that happens, really thinking about what happened, why it happened, can we name the experience, right, can really help us kind of move forward and not have it become a second prompting event. From UNC Chapel Hill, Barbara Fredrickson has done a lot kind of looking at positive outlook. And it's not to say that we don't ever feel emotions such as sadness, anger, and all of those things, but some of this research that has come out has, really talked about having a positive outlook can actually improve, right, our wellness. It can improve our physical wellness. It can improve a lot of aspects of who we are and how we experience our life. And that's what we're going to talk about next. In terms of, thinking about positive emotions, it can expand our awareness. It can open us up, right, to new ideas. And so, even in this particular training and the series of trainings after this, a lot of it for us is just adding things, hoping that we're adding things to your toolkit, maybe things that you're already doing, maybe introducing some new things to your toolkit so that you can experience your personal and professional life in the way that you hope to experience it. So let's move on, right, to our second objective. And here we're going to just talk briefly about the relationship between emotions and wellness. So I'd like you to think about this. I don't know, do we take a lot of time to think about what makes us feel good? What makes us feel well? What are the things that we do that really make us feel happy, content, joy, pleasure, satisfaction? So I'd like you to just take a pause, think about that. And if anyone's willing to share in the chat, maybe what one or two of those things are for you, that would be great. Stillness and silence, yoga, yes, outside, pets, people, massage, yes. Look at all these good things. Grandkids, gardening, look at all these ideas. Therapy, mindful meal, pets, babies, travel. But how often do we actually think about these things? I feel like, I don't know about you all, but it's like you go through your day-to-day kind of, you've got the routine and really thinking about these things, music. Ooh, an empty laundry basket. I love a good empty laundry basket. It's all kinds of things, right, that you all are talking about that can bring us joy, satisfaction, hot tea and yoga. These are great. So, I think it's important for us to think about these things and, take the time to do so, although I know time is a precious commodity, but the things that bring us joy, we have to think about, are we building our lives around those things? How are we making sure that we incorporate, right, those things in our life? Because we know that if we don't, that that can make us at greater risk for some outcomes that we probably would agree maybe less desirable. So, thinking about that for a moment in terms of really thinking about what are the things that we do that makes us feel well. And what I want to show you next, and you all may be very familiar with this, is the SAMHSA 8 dimensions of wellness. And I like it because I think it just introduces, and a lot of you have attended to things kind of across the circle here of the different dimensions. So we can kind of incorporate those ideas as we talk about this. It's not a new wheel, right? This wellness wheel, but I like it because there are a lot of different wellness tools out there, but it does focus on a lot of different areas and dimensions, right, of wellness that we may think about a lot of them, but maybe not all of them. So the social, you all are mentioning a lot of things related to that, right? In terms of relationships, being with others, being with grandkids, being with friends, being with babies, being with even our pets, right? Caring about others and letting people care about us, kind of that social aspect, even thinking about, I'm not sure if I was trying to monitor the chat, but it goes so fast, but even, volunteering, right? Volunteering could be another way we contribute to our community in a social way. That really contributes to how we feel. The intellectual dimension, right? Being curious, education, thinking about, learning new things so we're not bored, right? Sort of that intellectual stimulation that we talked about. Some of you had said, being a feeling we might have related to being burnt out in our job is being bored, right? And so are we being intellectually stimulated in the work that we're doing and the experiences that we have? So that's something to kind of think about. The physical dimension, a lot of you are talking about yoga and naps and working out. This is a big one. For me personally, I have to laugh, but after I had my daughter, I told my husband, if nothing else happens in the day, I absolutely need my 1 hour of workout time. It's one of those things that's just not a non-negotiable, and it's for me to function as a fully happy human being during the week. And so for each of us, it's going to be something different, but obviously thinking about the physical aspect of wellness as well in terms of health. The emotional dimension, right? So, which is what we're focused on today, understanding our feelings, right? And our emotions, and thinking about how we manage those. There's an environmental aspect we can think about. So just sort of being aware of our environment and our surroundings. A lot of you were talking about, going outside, right? Being outside, being in nature, financial wellness, right? So thinking about, making financial decisions, setting goals for ourselves financially, thinking about financial well-being. Obviously, a big one we probably think about quite a bit is, right, our work. How does our work, we're at work a lot of hours, right, during the week. And so is your work meaningful, right? Does it provide you joy? Is it consistent with what you want to do with your life? Does it allow you to contribute your unique capabilities, right, and skills and get creative in supporting others? And so thinking about what you're doing, right, in terms of your profession. And then the last piece, right, in terms of spiritual and thinking about how you find purpose, value, and meaning, right, in your life. And that can look a variety of ways for all of us, but just thinking about that more spiritual aspect. So again, I think, you can even do a little mini assessment on yourself, right? Thinking about this wheel and what dimensions do you tend to focus on more? Are there dimensions of this wheel where maybe you tend to focus a little less, and it might be something to think about how you could incorporate some things within your life to think about how to promote joy and wellness and a positive experience. And with our grant, we're really focused on promoting wellness in the workplace, right? And so, but I mean, to have a good experience in the workplace, we also individually, right, have to be having a good experience. But, we have to figure out a way, and I say this with a huge caveat because I haven't figured it out, right? But that work-life integration, some people call it work-life balance, right? How do we How do we do that, right? And so, a lot of people are using the term work-life balance. There's a suggestion to move towards this term work-life integration because it's more about trying to figure out how to blend those things, right? Rather than block off set times for, okay, this is work and then this is not work. Somebody's talking about creating boundaries in your personal and professional life, right? It is thinking about that, right? And how those things do blend together, don't blend together, right? The boundaries we set around our work and personal lives. And for all of us, that's going to be different in how that looks and how we want it to be, right? And some weeks I think it's easier to do, and some weeks it's not necessarily as easy to do. I think the other piece, I think I could be really bad at this too. So it's like, do as I say, not as I actually do, maybe. But, we've all got to have to think about how we can embrace support from others. I don't know how many of us have been in the experience where somebody's like, can I help? I can help with that. Like, how can I help you? And it's like, no, I'm going to do it. I just have to do it. I'm the only one that can do it. Maybe you don't say that to the person, but you're thinking that in your head, right? And so really this idea of promoting wellness is also kind of expanding ourselves to think about how do we embrace support and help, right? And really thinking about how asking for help is okay. And, a lot of us have gone through different pressures, struggles, challenges, experiences. And a lot of times if people know that, they're so willing to be helpful, right? And so how do we let people in a way that's appropriate and with appropriate boundaries, depending on the nature of the relationship, but allow that support to happen, especially on weeks that you may desperately need it, right? And in other weeks, maybe you're in a better position to be helpful to your family, friends, colleagues, right? But thinking about that. And I see folks talking about creating boundaries, and some weeks my boundaries are concrete walls and others they are hash marks on the highway, right? So, but it gets to this last one, right? In terms of establishing, it's different, but establishing, so here we're talking about establishing consistent behaviors, right, that promote your wellness. And one of the behaviors you might need to think about engaging in is setting boundaries, right? And how do we set boundaries? How do we, create those blocks of our day, right, where we're able to engage in the things we need to and want to do, right? And sometimes it's hard because some of the things we want to do oftentimes can fall off, right? When we're thinking about the finite hours of the day and all that we need to accomplish. But it is really important to think about, and yet not easy to do. Like, you look at the bullets on the slide, it's like, well, those aren't really like earth-shattering things, but I feel like it's the actual implementation of those in our daily lives where like the rubber meets the road, right? And it becomes more complex in how we actually have these things happen. And be open and flexible, right? Like the other day I had such a great plan. Ayla knows this. I had such a great plan. And then the school texted me that the water line broke and you have to pick your child up in 1 hour, right? And then the whole day, and so I had an initial emotional experience, and then I had to become flexible with how I was envisioning my work-life balance for the day, because it was not what I had expected, right? And so our best laid plans can, where those can go. But I think it's important to just think about how we are attending to these things and being mindful of them. Here's another kind of visual model. We like to present some of these as just tools to think about, right? Different ways to think about. This is a model by Alexander and colleagues, and the one thing I want to emphasize here is that you can see how kind of our cognitive controls, so how we're thinking, and our social relationships, right, that we've talked about, right, really can help us create positive emotions, right? And then in turn, happiness and sort of well-being. But the purple box is the one that I want to focus on, right? And so activity strategies and interventions, right, that cultivate positive emotions, we can be intentional about these things, right? We can be intentional about doing activities that lead us to have positive experiences, right? We have to plan for them sometimes, but we can be very intentional about that. And so, again, this is just another visual kind of depiction about how our emotions are influenced by lots of things, which is no surprise. right? But it's also about thinking about what makes you feel well and how can you intentionally engage in some of those experiences and build those into your lives so that you're cultivating more positive emotions, right? So that when you experience maybe some of the more negative things, it doesn't feel as challenging. Okay. So now we're going to move to the part where I'm not going to talk. And I think Caitlin's going to help us get into breakout groups for just a few minutes. And I'd like us to just have a couple, well, have one discussion, right, amongst a couple of you, just thinking about what we've talked about so far, right? How maybe one or two situations that typically draw out a more negative reaction from you as an individual. And then talking with your group, are there similarities in those differences, but also strategies, right? What emotional strategies, emotional regulation strategies do you use, right, during those times? And then maybe if you're willing to talk with those in your group about potential areas for growth or change related to managing your emotions. So thinking about basically all that we've talked about so far and just sharing out with a few people that Caitlin puts you into a group with, and then we'll come back. I might have a few folks share out. We'll see how we're doing with time. So let's do about 10 minutes in a breakout group. Yeah, we'll just do a quick 10 minutes and discuss this, and then some groups can share out. Anybody willing to share maybe just something that came out from the group that would be of the benefit of others, just in terms of areas of growth change or just some strategies that were shared across group members or even in the chat? Either.
The group was very fun. We had a theme around the areas of growth. Like when you say emotions only last 6 seconds, well, then why do they last 3 days? So the area of growth is letting go. After we process, after we look at it and understand where it comes from, then putting it down and letting it go.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Not an easy step, right? What about other groups?
We talked a little bit about staying after work late and the value of setting boundaries with ourselves as well as the people we work with, and trying to really leave work on time and letting tomorrow happen so that we have more time to take care of ourselves, which helps our self-care as well as decrease, hopefully, burnout. So we have time for ourselves and our family and the other things we enjoy in our life.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And also not easy to do, right? Because oftentimes people make requests of us or take up time in the day, not in a bad way, but then it leaves us feeling like there's so much we wanted to accomplish. We didn't accomplish it. I'm going to stay an hour late and finish up, but then it bleeds into other aspects of our lives. For sure. Any other group willing to share maybe a strategy or something you all discussed related to how the strategies you use to help manage the emotions we experience? Taking time to step away and actually have lunch. Yeah. It's not a good example of that today with this lunchtime webinar. Is like, I need to eat and answer emails at the same time. It's not good to do that, right? Not every day anyway. Yeah, changing thought patterns. I think that's the theme too, right? A lot of these things sound easy, but they really aren't easy, right? Changing thought patterns, trying to break out of routines, patterns we've set for ourselves in the work environment and trying out new patterns, right? We become so entrenched in our patterns, oftentimes it's hard to, but like emotions, I think the first step is recognizing them, right? What patterns do we have? What tendencies do we have? And how do we put boundaries in place to protect those aspects of our lives that make us feel well, right? When we think about those 8 dimensions. I see somebody say, I didn't get lunch today. I forgot about this webinar. Yeah, I can appreciate that. So, well, thank you all for engaging in that conversation with peers and colleagues. I think hopefully, a point of doing that is thinking about how common some of these experiences are that, right, we all have unique aspects of our emotional experiences and how we handle them, but there's so much shared commonality, right? And I think a lot of times we just don't talk about these things as professionals. It's just sort of carry on with the next task, but not really thinking about some of these deeper complexities associated with it. So now I'm going to go backwards, right, to objective 3 and just talk about a few strategies for regulating emotions and hopefully end on a relaxing note for you all that didn't really get your lunch break because you're here graciously listening to this webinar. So let's think about emotion management, right? How do we manage our emotions? And so one of the practices that can be helpful is mindfulness. And I know some of you on here are very well versed in that practice, but you know, Marsha Linehan, the woman who created DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, you know, sort of describes mindfulness about being in the present moment. So being in the here and now, and not judging that, right? And so, and also not attaching to that experience. So, right, so it's about being in the present moment, being in the here and now, being able to focus and narrow your attention in a way that is without judgment. That can be hard, right? Both focusing and without judgment. Both of those pieces, right? So being in the present without thinking about what you forgot or need to do. How many of you are, you know, thinking about after this, I have to do this, 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 and then during this, maybe multitasking, writing emails. I mean, I'm so guilty of it myself. And I just think, why can I never just sit and listen, right? Why can't I just take something in and be in the here and now, right? Because I'm the person who's multitasking. I'm writing emails. I'm doing this while I'm trying to, and it's so hard to focus, right? But we all do it, right? And so it's just our ability to be here, right? And that's hard. So, you know, you heard, right, in the first animation video that sometimes just being able to acknowledge that this is happening and this is how I'm feeling can be enough, right, to diffuse the situation or make you recognize that a change is needed. And so that's a technique, right? It's just being mindful, right? Being mindful of what we're doing, being in the here and now, in the present moment without judgment. Also, of course, right, taking care of our vulnerability factors. You know, you can't attend to things that have happened in the past, but you can take care of things like figuring out what those are for you, what some of your vulnerability factors are, right? And this relates to kind of all the dimensions of wellness. We can also be mindful, right, of our current thoughts. It's not about becoming our thoughts. So a lot of times when we experience kind of a strong emotion, it's not the event itself, it's that we have an emotional, it's our interpretation of it and what we think it may mean, right? How that it might impact us. And sometimes, and oftentimes, right, we can experience fear grounded in that. And so, you know, we're all human, but if we can be mindful and we know that that's what's happening, it can help us better manage, right, our emotions. So thinking about a lot of those of you may be very familiar with more acceptance-based skills, right? In emotion management, recognizing the emotion, accepting how you're feeling without judgment and allowing yourself to feel that way. So, you know, again, here with mindfulness of current thought, you know, allowing the thought, but not acting on the thought and not judging why you're thinking that, right? All of which is way more complicated than it sounds. But it's something to think about. So, you know, the practice really is notice the thought. You could label it, right? You could say, I'm worried, I'm scared, I'm frightened, but also recognize that that's a thought separate from yourself, right? And don't judge why you're thinking that. And coming at it more from this, what we call like a curious mindset. You know, I have a worrying thought. I wonder where that's coming from. Is this a pattern? You know, do I always tend to have these thoughts, right? Just sort of being curious about what you're thinking about and sort of letting it pass. So allowing the thought, letting it go, not judging it, not embracing it and attaching to it, and also not suppressing it, right? So these skills are not meant to suppress the things that you're thinking about, because if we suppress things, they actually can become more routinely invasive to us as thoughts. But it's more about noticing it, labeling it, not judging it, and kind of letting the thought pass. So this is why I shifted things. I think this is great where we're going to have an opportunity to practice mindfulness together. And it's a nice way. When I was preparing for this, I thought, wow, I feel more relaxed just listening to this. It's a 5-minute video, so I'll let you know how long it is. But it's focused on improving our mindfulness practice. I'll be interested to know how you feel after the 5 minutes, but if you can fully participate in this, for those of you that are multitasking and not having a lunch break and all those things, this may be one of those strategies you might want to try out for today and see how it makes you feel. Those of you who might have a really strong mindfulness practice, but I think there's always opportunities for growth in any strategies we use in our lives. So hopefully this will help us all calmly kind of wind down our time together. So I'm going to start playing this, and then we'll get back together, and then we'll start transitioning to the end of our time.
Gently breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. You may close your eyes or leave them slightly open. Relax in your chair or on the floor with your legs uncrossed. Relax your arms beside your body, or if you're sitting, rest your arms, palms up, on your thighs. First, notice your entire body. Feel the weight of your body in your chair or on the floor. Notice your chest and belly as you inhale and exhale. If you notice thoughts, sounds, or other sensations, just let them go. Use your breath to breathe attention into your body. Now bring your attention to your chest. Focus on the expansion of your chest as you breathe in. What sensations do you notice in your chest? Move your attention to your hands. Notice your left hand and your right hand. Feel the sensation of the air around your hands. Move your attention up to your arms. With curiosity, ask, what am I feeling in my left arm and in my right arm? If you notice any tension, let it go. Gently bring your attention to your shoulders and take this moment to dwell in your shoulders. Notice how your shoulders move with your breath. Focus your attention on your neck and throat. Feel your breath move through your throat. Do you notice any sensations in your neck and throat? Let go of any tension you have in this area. Move your attention up to your chin. What awareness do you have of your chin? Do you notice any sensations in your chin? Breathe your attention into your mouth and tongue. Notice the weight of your mouth and jaw. If you feel any tension in this area, let it go. Gently move your attention to your lips. What sensations do you notice in your lips? Bring your attention to your nose. Feel the air entering and exiting your nose. Does the air feel cold or warm? Take this moment to appreciate how your nose brings air in and out of your body. Now move your attention to your cheeks. Notice the sensation of the air on your cheeks. If your cheeks are not already relaxed, Gently say, relax on your exhale. Now move your awareness to your eyes and feel how your eyes rest in your body. If you feel any tension in this area, let it go. Gently bring your attention to your forehead. Breathe focus into your forehead. And let go of any tension you may feel in this area. Put your focus on your scalp and travel this attention to the very top of your head. What sensations do you feel? Does the air feel cool or warm on your scalp and head? Take a deep breath in and bring awareness to your entire body. Notice any sensations you have. Take one last breath in and exhale. Thank you for your participation in this exercise.
So how are we feeling after that? I thought it was a nice way to wind down our time together before we had to intersperse in the middle, and it feels too relaxing for a middle activity. I need to do that more often. I think the same. And it doesn't take very long, right? This is like a 5-minute video. Yeah, good thing to do in the middle of the day, not just in the morning or night. I think it's a great lunchtime thing, right? Just to kind of break up the day. That's what I was thinking.